Welcome to Uncloseted Conversations. Even if you stumbled upon this channel by accident, you are welcome here. The stories here are from my heart, from my soul, from my pen to your ears. I hope that you will stay a little longer and open yourself to the magic of storytelling. Here I write fiction, and though not always aligning with reality, it still tugs at heartstrings. Stories are escapes and sometimes a balm to the soul. So, enjoy your time here, and if reality presses down too loud and too hard, come knock at the door, come in, take a seat, grab a coffee, and just exhale. These are veil-bound stories, and the space is free and non-judgmental. Sit back, earphones or pods in, and let's listen to another exquisite romance. The Gilded Debt. She didn't just come back to visit. She came back to collect. Chapter 1. The Audacity of Joy. The Gilded Lily did not just provide dinner, it provided a sense of being untouchable. The air inside the main dining room was filtered to a specific, crisp temperature, smelling faintly of expensive jasmine and aged oak. Every clink of silver against bone china was muffled by thick Persian rugs, and the light from the crystal chandeliers was dimmed to a level that made everyone look 10 years younger and twice as wealthy. At table 7, the most coveted spot in the house, Eleanor Cohen sat with the posture of a queen whose subjects were failing her. Her daughter, Bianca, sat opposite, scrolling through her phone with a look of permanent boredom that she mistook for sophistication. It was almost easy, almost natural, to blend in here. Almost. But something taut beneath Talia's skin tightened, a flicker of recognition at the rigid air of entitlement. She didn't linger on it, didn't allow its space to grow. The memory she carried of being told she was expendable, she buried it instantly, locking it behind steel and silk. "It's the lack of discipline, Bianca," Eleanor hissed, her voice cutting through the soft ambient jazz like a serrated blade. "This is a 5-star establishment. I pay $30,000 a year in membership fees to not have to deal with the public's lack of parenting." She was looking at Matthew. The 4-year-old was a blur of dark curls and a miniature navy linen suit. He wasn't crying or screaming. He was doing something far worse in Eleanor's eyes. He was being friendly. He had just stopped by the waiter's station to high-five Marco, a senior server who had been with the club for a decade. Marco leaned down, whispering something that made the boy let out a bright, melodic peal of laughter. A faint pang crossed Talia's chest, memories of being a child unseen, of hands extended and ignored, but she brushed it away. "That Talia is gone." "Look at that," Bianca sneered, finally looking up. "The staff are hovering around that child like he's a prophet instead of pouring your Sancerre. He's running toward the kitchen now. He'll probably trip a server and ruin someone's vintage Chanel. Where are his parents? Probably new money, no sense of decorum." Eleanor snapped her fingers, a sharp, metallic sound. Instantly, Jean-Pierre, the club's unflappable manager, appeared at her side. "Madame Cohen, is the vintage not to your liking?" "The wine is fine, Jean-Pierre." "The atmosphere is a disaster," Eleanor said, gesturing vaguely toward the kitchen doors where Matthew's small heels had just disappeared. "That child is a nuisance. He is distracting the staff, he is a safety hazard, and, frankly, he is ruining the exclusivity of my evening. I have a very important dinner starting in 20 minutes with the Deshays investors. I cannot have a toddler underfoot." Talia's spine stiffened imperceptibly. She could feel Eleanor's authority, thick and brittle, pressing against the room, a force she had once been crushed under. She reminded herself, that was then. This is now. Jean-Pierre didn't blink. "I assure you, madam, the young master is quite welcome. Chef Gaspard considers him his toughest critic. He is currently inspecting the amuse-bouche." Eleanor's eyes narrowed into slits. "I don't care if he's a critic. I care that he is a disruption. Fix it, Jean-Pierre. Find the parents, tell them to leash their child or remove him, or I'll have your position by dessert. I want to speak to the owner. Immediately." Talia felt a quiet, almost imperceptible echo of a wound, The sharp sting of being dismissed, ignored, controlled, but it was a flicker, instantly buried beneath a veneer of steel. No one will see it. No one will touch it. Jean-Pierre bowed his head slightly, a strange, knowing glint in his eyes. As you wish, madam. The owner has just arrived. I shall let her know you are eager to meet. Chapter 2. The Click of the Metronome. The dining room fell into a sudden, expectant hush. It wasn't the kind of silence that follows an accident, but the kind that precedes a storm. Then came the sound. Clack, clack, clack. The rhythmic strike of Christian Louboutin heels against the Italian marble foyer was as precise as a metronome. The sound did not hurry. It was measured, unapologetic. Each step seemed to claim the floor rather than merely cross it. Eleanor straightened her silk blazer, ready to lecture on standards to whoever dared command this failing sanctuary. The woman who rounded the corner didn't walk. She entered the room as if she owned its air. Every inch of her bespoke ivory power suit radiated authority, making the room's white tablecloths look faintly yellow by comparison. Her hair was swept back in a glass-smooth bun, her makeup the effortless perfection of international runways. She did not look surprised. She did not look angry. She looked as if she had expected this exact scene and had dressed accordingly. Behind her moved a study in old-world elegance, Marguerite de Chaise, French heiress, whose family name was carved into half the landmarks of Lyon. Eleanor rose, a fake, practiced smile forming. Finally. I assume you are the management? I have been trying to explain to your staff that. The words died in her throat. The management stopped 3 feet from the table. The woman in ivory tilted her head, her piercing amber eyes raking over Eleanor and Bianca with a coldness that could have frozen the champagne in their glasses. Talia? Bianca whispered. Her phone slipped from her hand and clattered onto the table. Talia let the pause stretch, letting silence bend the air. Just long enough for the name to feel small, fragile, insignificant. Then she spoke, her voice lower than 15 years ago, richer, layered with an accent forged in Paris and London. You're late with your complaint, Bianca, she said. I heard you from the foyer. You haven't changed, still trying to control rooms you don't own. Eleanor's face went from indignant red to a ghostly, chalky white. Talia? But how? We made sure you had nothing. Marguerite stepped forward, sliding her arm around Talia's waist. It was not protective, it was a declaration. Alliance. Shared power. She looked at Eleanor with the kind of disdain reserved for a smudge on a designer shoe. Darling, Marguerite said, her melodic French lilt soft but sharp, are these the guests who were complaining about our son? Talia's gaze did not leave her mother. Yes, my love. It seems my mother considers Matteo a nuisance. Jean-Pierre, ever the professional, stepped beside Talia and bowed. Mrs. Talia Cohen de Chaise, welcome back. I was just telling these women your arrival would be perfect. His tone shifted, precise and sharp in English. They were quite insistent on seeing the owner. Talia allowed herself a slow, deliberate glance around the room. Every pair of eyes that dared linger fell away, repelled by her calm authority. She did not rush forward. She did not need to. She owned the silence before it even existed. Marguerite squeezed her waist once, a small, silent acknowledgement. This was no rescue. This was alliance. Shared dominion, carved in measured gestures. Eleanor's lips trembled. The air seemed suddenly too tight around her throat. The woman she had tried to destroy was untouchable, and she knew it. Chapter 3. The Night the Locks Changed. 15 years ago. The rain in Connecticut didn't feel like water. It felt like needles. 18-year-old Talia stood on the gravel driveway of the Cohen estate, her fingers white-knuckled around the handle of a single, battered suitcase. You are a stain on this name, Talia. Eleanor's voice echoed from the grand colonial doorway. She stood framed by the warm, golden light of the foyer, a light Talia was no longer allowed to stand in. "I won't marry him, Mother," Talia screamed over the wind. "He's 40 years old, and he's a predator. You're selling me to bail out Dad's bad investments. I am securing this family's future," Eleanor shouted back. "You take and take, but you offer nothing. Look at your sister. Bianca has already agreed to her debut. She understands sacrifice. You're just a girl with a suitcase and a rebellious streak that will lead you to the gutter." Bianca stood behind their mother, watching through the glass. She didn't speak. She didn't wave. She just watched as if Talia were a movie she was bored of watching. "I'm your daughter." Talia's voice cracked. "No," Eleanor said, her face hardening into a mask of stone. "I'm not throwing you out. I'm simply stopping the investment in a failed product. Don't bother calling. The locks are being changed as we speak. If you set foot on this property again, I'll have you arrested for trespassing." The heavy oak door slammed shut. The sound of the deadbolt clicking into place was the loudest thing Talia had ever heard. She stood in the dark, the rain soaking through her thin jacket, realizing that the people inside weren't her family. They were her jailers, and they had just set her free into a world where she had nothing but her name, a name she vowed, right then, to make more powerful than theirs would ever be. She turned her back on the light and started walking toward the gates. She didn't look back once. The rain in Connecticut hadn't just soaked her clothes, it had chilled her bones in a way that didn't leave for months. But the physical cold was nothing compared to the silence of the city. In her first week in New York, Talia lived in a room that wasn't a room. It was a partitioned corner of a basement in Queens, separated from 3 strangers by a sheet of moldy plywood. The air smelled of damp concrete and someone else's fried onions. One Tuesday, after walking 6 miles to save the $2.50 for the bus, Talia sat on the edge of her thin mattress. Her feet were bleeding into her socks. The expensive leather flats she'd been wearing when she was kicked out were never meant for miles of pavement. They were falling apart, the soles flapping like a dying fish. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. It was almost dead, the screen cracked. She stared at the contact, Mother. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Her stomach cramped, not from nerves, but from the 3 days she'd spent living on nothing but tap water and a single pack of saltine crackers. If she called, there would be a warm bed. There would be a steak dinner. There would be silk sheets. All she had to do was say, "You were right. I am nothing. Please let me come home." She watched a tear drip onto the cracked screen, magnifying the word mother. Her hand shook. She wanted to be a child again. She wanted to be taken care of. Then, she remembered the sound of the deadbolt. Click. The sound of her value being zeroed out. Talia turned the phone off and shoved it into the bottom of her suitcase. She wouldn't call. She would rather starve as a failed product than survive as a puppet. That night, she fell asleep counting the rhythm of her own hunger pangs, whispering to the dark, "I am still here. I am still here." Chapter 4. The First Spark. The Greyhound bus to New York City smelled of stale cigarettes and broken dreams, but to 18-year-old Talia, it was a chariot. She sat pressed against the window, watching the Connecticut skyline vanish. She had exactly $400 sewn into the lining of her coat, money she'd skimmed from her own graduation gifts over the months, a secret rebellion she hadn't realized would become her lifeline. Her first week in the city was a masterclass in invisibility. In the Cohen household, Talia had been a problem to be managed. In Manhattan, she was just another girl in a crowded diner, nursing a single cup of black coffee for 3 hours to stay out of the cold. "You looking for work or just a permanent residency at Table 4? The voice belonged to Sal, a man whose face looked like a crumpled paper bag and who ran a high-end catering kitchen in Hell's Kitchen. "Work," Talia said, her voice raspy from lack of use. "Anything. I can prep, I can clean, I can organize." "You look like a debutante," Sal grunted, eyeing her damp silk blouse, the only nice thing she owned. Those hands haven't seen a day of labor in their life. Those hands are the only thing I have left, Talia replied, her amber eyes flashing with a spark that made Sal pause. Try me. If I break a dish, don't pay me. He hired her as a dishwasher. For 6 months, the girl who used to have her linens pressed by a maid spent 14 hours a day with her arms submerged in gray, greasy water. Her fingernails broke, her skin grew raw. But she didn't cry. Every time her back ached, she pictured Eleanor's face and the sound of that deadbolt clicking into place. The humiliation at Sal's kitchen didn't happen all at once. It was a slow erosion. In her second month, while the other kitchen staff were taking their cigarette breaks, Talia was tasked with cleaning the grease trap beneath the industrial dishwashers. It was a foul, sludge-filled job that left her smelling like rotting meat and old lemon joy. As she was kneeling on the wet floor, her hair matted with sweat, a group of young women, no older than her, walked through the back alley entrance to pick up a catering order. They were dressed in sundresses and wore the familiar, effortless scent of Jo Malone. They looked like the girls Talia used to go to school with. One of them looked down, her eyes landing on Talia huddled in the filth. The girl didn't see a peer, she saw a servant. She pulled her skirt back as if Talia's presence were a stain that might jump onto her silk hem. Gross, the girl whispered to her friend. Imagine having to do that for a living. They laughed and walked past. Talia stayed on her knees. Her vision blurred. For a second, the urge to scream, to tell them she knew the designer of that dress, to tell them she had a trust fund she couldn't touch, almost choked her. But she didn't scream. She reached into the grease trap and pulled out a handful of muck. Later that night, she sat at her small, wobbly table in the basement. She emptied her pockets. $6 in crumpled ones. 42 cents in copper and silver. She laid the coins out in a perfect, straight line. 1 loaf of bread. 2 transit passes. 1 bar of soap. She stared at the coins until her eyes ached. She wasn't just counting money, she was counting the days until she never had to be looked down upon again. She picked up a nickel and gripped it so hard the metal bit into her palm. Gold standard, she whispered, her voice a low, raspy vow in the empty room. One day, I will be the gold standard. The spark didn't come from a flash of inspiration. It came from the absolute, crushing bottom of the grease trap. It came from the realization that she had nothing left to lose, which meant she was finally dangerous. The spark happened on a Tuesday. Sal's main event coordinator had quit in a fit of pique 2 hours before a gallery opening for a temperamental Soho artist. The kitchen was in chaos. Trays were disorganized, the staff were bickering, and the luxury vibe was melting into a disaster. Talia stepped out from behind the sink. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked over to Sal, who was currently shouting into a landline. Give me the clipboard, Sal, she said, her voice calm and terrifyingly steady. Get back to the suds, kid. I'm busy. You're failing, Talia countered. The Pinot Noir is at the wrong temperature, the appetizers are being plated like cafeteria food, and your lead server is wearing scuffed shoes. Give me the board. I know how these people think. I was raised by them. Something in her tone, the sheer, unadulterated Cohen authority, made Sal hand it over. For the next 4 hours, Talia didn't just coordinate, she orchestrated. She moved through the gallery like a ghost of the elite. She knew exactly how to speak to the billionaire collectors, not as a servant, but as a peer providing a curated experience. She caught a waiter trying to serve a cracked flute of champagne and stopped him with a single look that would have made Eleanor proud. At the end of the night, the artist, a man who usually hated everyone, approached Sal. The service was impeccable. Who is the girl in the black dress? She has presence. Sal looked at Talia, who was currently leaning against a steel table, her feet throbbing, a smudge of charcoal on her cheek. That's my new floor manager, Sal said, grinning. That night, Talia didn't go back to her cramped studio and collapse. She sat on the fire escape, looking at the glowing skyscrapers of Midtown. She realized that her family hadn't just kicked her out, they had accidentally given her a weapon. She knew their world, their rules, and their weaknesses. She wasn't going to just survive. She was going to build a world where they were the ones who didn't belong. She pulled a small notebook from her pocket and wrote 2 words on the first page, the goal. Underneath, she didn't write money. She wrote, The Gilded Lily. Chapter 5, The French Connection. By 23, Talia had outgrown New York. She had worked her way up from Sal's dishwasher to the most sought-after freelance event consultant in Manhattan. She was the woman people called when a gala was falling apart or a diplomat needed a dinner that remained strictly off the record. She had saved every penny, lived like a monk, and studied the movements of the global elite like a general studying enemy territory. But the ceiling in New York was made of glass and old boy networks. To truly own the room, she needed a pedigree the Cohens couldn't touch. She moved to France. The move to Lyon wasn't the glamorous escape Talia had dreamed of. It was a cold, lonely gamble. She arrived with a suitcase that was more duct tape than leather and a French vocabulary that was functional but lacked the poetry of the elite. She landed a job as a commis de rang, the lowest of the low, at a historic estate that hosted high society weddings. The physical toll was a different kind of agony. The floors were uneven stone, centuries old, designed to punish anyone who stood on them for 16 hours. By the end of the first month, the blisters on Talia's heels had popped, bled, and turned into thick, ugly calluses. One night, after a particularly brutal shift where a drunken guest had snapped his fingers at her and called her the American waitress as if it were a slur, Talia retreated to her tiny attic room above the stables. The room was freezing, the wind whistling through the cracks in the wood. She sat on the floor and peeled off her stockings. They were stuck to her skin with dried blood. Talia hissed in pain, the sound echoing in the rafters. She looked at her feet, raw, swollen, and trembling. For a moment, she sat in the dark and sobbed. Not a quiet, cinematic tear, but a ragged, ugly heave of her chest. She was tired. She was so incredibly tired of being the person at the bottom of the stairs. But then she saw her reflection in the small, cracked mirror propped against the wall. She saw the dirt under her nails, the exhaustion in her eyes, and the sheer, stubborn set of her jaw. She reached for a bottle of cheap, stinging antiseptic she'd bought at the pharmacy. Without flinching, she poured it directly over the raw skin. The pain was blinding. She bit her lip until it bled to keep from screaming. Pain is data, she whispered to herself, a mantra she'd picked up in the kitchens of New York. It tells you where you are. It doesn't tell you where you're going. She stood up. Her legs shook, but she forced herself to walk across the room. 1 step. 2 steps. She practiced her manager's walk, the steady, rhythmic pace she had observed in the great houses. She ignored the fire in her feet. She focused on the posture. The strength didn't come from a lack of pain. It came from the fact that the pain no longer had the power to make her sit down. Lyon was a city of silk and secrets, and the most guarded secret of all was the Deshays estate. Talia had been hired to manage the logistics of the Deshays Harvest Gala, an event so exclusive that even the French Prime Minister had to wait for an invitation. The matriarch of the family had passed, leaving the estate in the hands of her only daughter, Marguerite, who was rumored to be as cold as the Alpine air. The first time Talia saw Marguerite, she wasn't impressed by her wealth, she was struck by her stillness. Marguerite was standing on a stone balcony overlooking the Rhone, dressed in a simple black silk slip dress, her blonde hair caught in the wind. She looked lonely in a way Talia recognized in her own reflection. The vintage is peaking too early, Marguerite said, not turning around as Talia approached with the catering manifests. The humidity in the cellar is up by 2%. The guests will notice. No, they won't, Talia replied, her French fluent but sharpened by an American clip. They'll be too busy looking at the way you've positioned the lighting to hit the rose garden. They'll be intoxicated by the theater of it all before they even take a sip. Marguerite turned then. Her eyes were a startling, clear blue, the color of high-altitude ice. You speak as if luxury is a weapon, Mademoiselle Cohen. It is, Talia said, stepping closer. It's the only weapon that makes the person being hit thank you for the blow. Marguerite didn't smile, but her gaze lingered on Talia's face. You aren't like the other consultants. You don't fawn. I don't have time to fawn, Mademoiselle Deschaise. I have a legacy to build. Over the next month, the professional boundary between them began to blur. They spent late nights in the estate's library, planning not just the gala, but the future of the Deschaise brand. Talia brought the fire and the business aggression of New York. Marguerite brought the centuries of refinement and the quiet power of European nobility. The spark happened over a bottle of 1945 Bordeaux, long after the staff had gone to bed. Why do you work so hard, Talia? Marguerite asked, her voice soft in the candlelight. You move as if you were being hunted. Talia looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time in nearly a decade, she told the truth. She told her about the rain in Connecticut. She told her about the sound of the deadbolt. She told her about the $400 sewn into her coat. Marguerite didn't offer pity. She reached across the table and took Talia's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. They tried to erase you, Marguerite whispered. But they only succeeded in making you indelible. If you stay with me, Talia, we won't just build a legacy. We will build a fortress that no Cohen can ever breach. It wasn't just a proposal of love, it was a pact. 3 years later, they were married in that same rose garden. 2 years after that, they welcomed Mathieu via a surrogate, a boy who carried the Deschaise grace and the Cohen fire. Talia was no longer the girl with the suitcase. She was one half of the most powerful couple in the European luxury market. And she had finally found the perfect moment to buy a certain failing social club in New York called the Gilded Lily. She didn't buy it for the profit. She bought it because she knew her mother's membership was the only thing keeping Eleanor's social standing alive. The trap was set. Now, she just had to wait for her mother to walk through the front door. Chapter 6. The Architect of the New Guard. Talia didn't just work for the Deschaise estate. She began to consume the knowledge within its walls. While other employees slept, Talia sat in the estate's private library, teaching herself the nuances of international contract law, luxury tax shelters, and the history of European real estate. She began to understand that wealth wasn't just about having money, it was about leverage. The connection with Marguerite wasn't born of a whirlwind romance, but of a shared, quiet recognition. Marguerite was a woman trapped by a legacy she found suffocating. Talia was a woman who had been suffocated by a legacy she was denied. The turning point happened late one evening in the estate's glass-walled solarium. They were working on a proposal for a boutique hotel chain. Talia had been awake for 48 hours, fueled by espresso and a burning, internal fire. You look at these numbers as if they are a battlefield, Marguerite said, leaning over Talia's shoulder. They are, Talia replied, her eyes red-rimmed. Every euro we save is a brick in a wall they can't climb over. I'm not just building a business, Marguerite. I'm building a fortress. Marguerite reached down, her cool fingers brushing Talia's wrist. A fortress is a very lonely place to live, Talia. Believe me. I have lived in one since I was born. Talia looked up. For the first time, she saw the cracks in the French heiress's composure. Marguerite wasn't just a boss. She was a woman looking for a reason to care about the millions she inherited. Then let's build a home instead, Talia whispered. But we build the walls thick enough to keep the ghosts out. The partnership shifted that night. It became a fusion of Marguerite's effortless, old-world grace and Talia's raw, American ambition. They were unstoppable. Within 3 years, they had tripled the Deschaise holdings. Talia was no longer the girl in the damp Queen's basement. She was the CEO of a global conglomerate, a woman whose name, the one she chose to keep, just to spite her mother, was now whispered in the boardrooms of Paris and London. But the gold standard needed a crowning jewel. "I want the Gilded Lily," Talia told Marguerite as they looked out over the Seine one evening. "It's dying. The membership is old, the decor is stagnant, and the debt is being bought up by vultures. I want to be the primary vulture." "It's a sentimental choice," Marguerite noted, sipping her wine. "And sentiment is expensive." "It's not sentimental," Talia countered, her voice dropping to that cold, resonant frequency. "It's strategic. My mother's entire identity is tied to that club. If she loses her seat at that table, she ceases to exist. I'm not going to kill her, Marguerite. I'm going to make her invisible." Marguerite smiled, a slow, predatory expression. "Then we shall buy it. And we shall make it so beautiful that she will weep every time she walks through the door, knowing she no longer belongs." They sealed the deal with a kiss that tasted of salt and triumph. The fortress was no longer just for protection, it was for the hunt. Chapter 7. Building the Fortress. The acquisition of the Gilded Lily was handled with the surgical precision of a Black Ops mission. Talia didn't use her own name. She used a labyrinth of holding companies based in Luxembourg and the Cayman Islands. To the board of directors in New York, the buyer was simply the Artemis Group. "Are you sure about this, Mon Coeur?" Marguerite asked one evening. They were in their Parisian townhouse, the floor littered with architectural blueprints for the club's renovation. Mathieu, barely 3 at the time, was curled up on a rug, fast asleep with a plush lion tucked under his arm. Talia looked at the ledgers. "The club is hemorrhaging money, Marguerite. The old guard, people like my mother, are holding onto their memberships like life rafts, but they aren't spending. They're coasting on a prestige that no longer exists." "It is a lot of effort for a woman who threw you away," Marguerite noted, her voice gentle but observant. "It's not about the effort," Talia said, her eyes fixed on a line item. "Member 004, Eleanor Cohen. Dues, overdue 90 days. It's about the closure. They made the world a cold place for me. I'm just returning the favor." Talia didn't just buy the club, she reinvented it. She kept the name but gutted the soul. She hired Jean-Pierre away from a 5-star hotel in Monaco. She lured Chef Gaspard from a Michelin-starred kitchen in Paris with the promise of total creative freedom. She replaced the stuffy, velvet drapes with airy, Italian marble and lighting that cost more than the Cohens' first mortgage. But the most important change was the staff. Talia implemented a family-first policy. Every waiter, busboy, and dishwasher was paid a living wage, given health insurance, and treated with the dignity she had been denied at 18. "If the staff loves the house," Talia told Jean-Pierre during their first briefing, "the guests will feel it. And if the guests are cruel to the staff, they are no longer guests." As the grand reopening approached, Talia began to hear the whispers from across the Atlantic. The New York social scene was buzzing about the new Gilded Lily. It was the only place to be. Even the Cohens, despite their dwindling bank accounts, scrambled to keep their memberships. They viewed it as their birthright. The final piece of the fortress was the dinner. The Deschaines-Cohen conglomerate was launching a new line of luxury hotels. Talia chose the Gilded Lily for the launch party. She knew her mother and sister would be there. They couldn't resist the gravitational pull of a high society event. "We go back next week," Talia said, standing on her balcony in Paris, looking toward the horizon. "And Mathieu?" Marguerite asked, joining her. "He comes with us," Talia said, a small, fierce smile playing on her lips. "I want him to see the place his mother built. And I want them to see the boy they were never worthy of knowing." Talia spent the night before their flight practicing her French. Not because she needed to, but because it was a language her mother didn't understand, a linguistic wall that would forever separate the woman she had become from the girl they had discarded. The fortress was complete. The trap was baited with champagne and caviar, and Eleanor Cohen was about to walk right into it. Chapter 8: The Prince of the Kitchen, Present Day. The high-tension silence of the dining room was almost palpable, like a held breath that no one dared exhale. The transition from the memory of Connecticut rain to the gleaming marble of the Gilded Lily was jarring, almost cinematic in its contrast. Talia stood before Eleanor and Bianca, one hand resting lightly on Marguerite's waist. The air seemed heavier, charged with a quiet electricity that made every silver fork on the table feel like it had weight. "You," Eleanor stammered, hand trembling as it hovered over her wine glass, empty. "You're the owner?" "You're Artemis." Among other things, Talia said, her voice smooth, deliberate, and lethal in its calm. She allowed a fraction of a second of pause, letting the words settle like snow on a warm fire, before continuing. Then the double kitchen doors swung open. Matteo burst into the room like a comet, face bright with triumph, clutching a small, intricately decorated chocolate tart. Behind him, Chef Gaspard followed, laughing as he dusted flour from his apron. "Maman, look!" Matteo cried in French. Chef Gaspard aimait dans le premier. He ran straight to Talia, ignoring Eleanor and Bianca entirely. Talia bent, scooping him into her arms. The chocolate smudges on her ivory suit were irrelevant. "It looks delicious, mon petit prince," she whispered, pressing a gentle kiss to his forehead. Eleanor's eyes went wide, disbelief painting her face. That is your son?" "He is my world," Talia replied, letting the warmth she showed Matteo vanish like frost under a noonday sun, her gaze sharpening into ice. "And he is the child you tried to have leashed or removed from my club." Bianca looked as though she wished the floor would open up and swallow her whole. "Talia, we didn't know. We thought he was. We were just worried about the standards of the club." "The standards of the club," Talia interrupted, voice low, smooth, and authoritative, "are mine to set, Bianca. And my standards do not include guests who treat staff as servants or children as nuisances." Jean-Pierre stepped forward, silver tray in hand. Two leather-bound folders sat like a challenge atop it. "The membership files you requested, Madame Cohen-Deschaise." Talia accepted them without a glance inside. She already knew their contents, and the knowledge gave her a private, cold satisfaction. "I believe you were worried about an important dinner tonight?" Talia asked, tilting her head slightly, letting the words drip with subtle mockery. "The Deschaise investors?" Eleanor nodded quickly, desperate hope flickering across her face. "Yes, we've been waiting months for this meeting. If you could just—" "The investors are already here, Mother," Talia said, gesturing ever so slightly to Marguerite. "You're looking at the primary shareholder. And I'm afraid she's decided to take her business elsewhere." Eleanor blinked, lips parting in shock. The room seemed to shrink around her, the walls closing in with the invisible weight of Talia's authority. Bianca clutched her napkin, pale, mute, and powerless. Matteo wiggled in Talia's arms, unaware of the currents of vengeance and triumph swirling in the room. She kissed the top of his curls again, whispering softly in French, just for him. "This is how we take our world back." Chapter 9: The Multilingual Dismissal. Talia held Matteo on her hip, the boy's small hand resting possessively on her shoulder. The contrast was striking, the innocent, chocolate-smudged child and the woman who looked like she could buy and sell the city block they stood on. Eleanor tried to stand, her pearls rattling against her neck. "Talia, let's not be dramatic. We had no idea this was yours. If we had known—" "If you had known, you would have been charming," Talia interrupted, her voice dropping to a dangerous, melodic register. "You would have played the part of the doting grandmother and the supportive mother. But you didn't know. And that is the point, isn't it? You only treat people with dignity when you think they have power over you. Talia turned to Jean-Pierre, switching seamlessly into fluent, rapid-fire French. Jean-Pierre, voilà apporter à l'édition pour la table Septembre immédiatement. Et assurez-vous que les phrases d'adhésion pour l'année en cours sont remboursées au parada. Nous ne voulons pas de leur argent ici. Jean-Pierre, please bring the check for table 7. Immediately. And ensure the membership fees for the current year are refunded pro rata. We do not want their money here. Eleanor and Bianca blinked, looking between Talia and the manager. They caught the tone, if not the words. What are you saying? Bianca demanded, her voice rising in a pitch of panic. We have a reservation. We have guests arriving in 10 minutes. Your guests have already been redirected, Marguerite interjected. Her French accent was thick, elegant, and utterly dismissive. She stepped closer to Talia, her presence adding a layer of European steel to the room. The investors you were hoping to impress are associates of my family. I sent them a brief message moments ago. They will be dining at our private residence tonight instead. The color drained from Eleanor's face. That dinner was her Hail Mary, the only way to save the Cohen estate from the mounting debts Talia had been quietly tracking for months. You can't do this, Eleanor whispered, her voice cracking. I am a founding member of the original club. I have status here. Talia stepped forward, her Louboutins clicking once, final and sharp. You had status in a world that died 15 years ago, Mother. In this world, my world, status is earned by how you treat the help. You complained that Matteo was distracting the staff? The staff are his family. They are the people who watched him take his first steps in the herb garden. They are the people who actually care if he's happy. Talia looked at Jean-Pierre and switched back to English for the benefit of the room. Jean-Pierre, please tell Chef Gaspard, no dessert for Matteo before dinner. He's had enough excitement for one evening. Certainly, madame, Jean-Pierre replied with a small, satisfied bow. As for these two, Talia continued, gesturing to Eleanor and Bianca as if they were nothing more than an incorrect wine order, their memberships are revoked, effective immediately. They are to be escorted to the foyer to wait for their car. They are no longer welcome at the Gilded Lily. Talia, you're our daughter. Our sister. Bianca cried out, looking around at the other diners who were now whispering behind their menus. No, Talia said, mirroring the cold finality her mother had used on that rainy night in Connecticut. I'm simply stopping the investment in a failed product. Isn't that what you told me? She turned her back on them, an effortless pivot that signaled the end of the conversation. Jean-Pierre, Talia added over her shoulder, once they are gone, please have table 7 decleaned. I'd like to sit there with my wife and son for dinner. I want to replace the memory of this conversation with something better. Chapter 10. The bill comes due. The lobby of the Gilded Lily was a cathedral of shadow and gold. Talia stood by the velvet-roped entrance, watching the rain lash against the glass doors. This was the moment she had rehearsed for 1,000 nights in that freezing lion attic. But as Eleanor and Bianca approached, the clean victory Talia expected began to fray at the edges. Talia, wait, Bianca hissed. She stepped away from her mother, cornering Talia near a marble pillar. Her voice was a desperate, honeyed poison. You want to punish her? Fine. She's old, she's obsessed with the past. But me? I'm your sister. I knew what she was doing back then, and I hated it. I was just a kid, Talia. I was scared. If you take me with you, if you give me a job at the conglomerate, I can give you everything. I can tell you every secret she's hidden. Don't throw me into the gutter with her. Talia looked at her sister. The betrayal was so casual, so Cohen. For a split second, Talia felt a wave of nausea. This was the person she had shared a nursery with. You'd sell her out for a paycheck? Talia whispered. I'm a survivor, Bianca snapped, her eyes darting toward the exit. Just like you. No, Talia said, her voice trembling with a sudden, hot rage. I survived you. There's a difference. She pushed past Bianca, but before she could signal the doorman, a sound stopped her cold. The sound of knees hitting marble. Talia turned. Eleanor Cohen, the woman who had once told her she was a failed product, was on the floor. She wasn't elegant anymore. Her expensive wig had shifted slightly, revealing the thin, gray hair beneath. She reached out, her fingers catching the hem of Talia's ivory trousers. "Please," Eleanor sobbed. It wasn't a noble sound. It was the wet, gasping sound of a woman drowning. "I'll do anything. I'll be your maid. I'll sit in the back. Just don't make me go out there. I don't know how to be nobody." Talia froze. Internally, a massive, ancient fault line shifted. "Pick her up," a voice in her head screamed. "She's your mother. You won. Isn't this enough? Just give her a room. Be the bigger person." For 5 agonizing seconds, Talia wavered. Her hand reached out, her fingers twitching toward Eleanor's shoulder. She felt the heavy, suffocating weight of 15 years of wanting to be told she was good enough. But then, Eleanor looked up. And even in her desperation, the old viper flickered in her eyes. Seeing Talia's hesitation, Eleanor sensed an opening. She leaned in, her voice a jagged whisper. "You see? You still can't do it. You still have that soft, pathetic core I tried to burn out of you. You're wearing the suit and the shoes, Talia, but you're still that crying girl in the driveway. You'll give in. Because you're mine. And I'll always be the one who owns your conscience." The words hit like a physical blow. The internal wavering stopped. The warmth that had been rising in Talia's chest turned into a block of absolute, sub-zero ice. Talia stepped back, pulling her hem out of Eleanor's grasp. She looked down at her mother, not with hate, but with a profound, final clarity. "You're wrong, Mother," Talia said, her voice now a terrifyingly calm whisper. "You don't own my conscience. You just provided the map of exactly who I never want to be." Talia looked at the doorman. Her face was a mask of stone, though her heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Open the doors," Talia commanded. "Talia, no." Eleanor shrieked, her dignity finally dissolving into a panicked scramble as the cold wind rushed in. "The car is a taxi, not a town car," Talia added, her voice echoing in the vast foyer. "And Bianca? Since you're such a survivor, I'm sure you'll have no trouble carrying both suitcases. The Queen's apartment has stairs. I suggest you start practicing." As the door shut behind them, Talia stood perfectly still. Her hands were shaking so violently she had to clench them into fists. She felt sick. She felt hollow. She felt like she had just killed a ghost. Marguerite appeared at her side, her touch a cool, steadying force on Talia's arm. She didn't say anything, she just stood there, a witness to the final, bloody cord being cut. "It's done," Talia whispered, more to herself than to Marguerite. "It is," Marguerite replied. "Now, come back to the light. Matteo is waiting for his dessert." Chapter 11. The Language of Silk and Salt. While the world saw the power couple, the iron-willed Talia and the aristocratic Marguerite, the walls of their home held a different version of them. After the firestorm at the Gilded Lily, they retreated to their sanctuary. The penthouse was quiet, the city lights below reduced to a shimmering, distant hum. Marguerite had dismissed the staff for the night, wanting the air to be clear of anyone else's expectations. Talia was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, her forehead pressed against the glass. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache. Marguerite didn't speak. She moved across the room with that silent, predatory grace, coming to stand directly behind Talia. She reached out, her hand sliding under Talia's hair to rest on the back of her neck. Her skin was warm, a sharp contrast to Talia's lingering chill. "You are still in that foyer," Marguerite whispered, her breath ghosting against Talia's ear. "Leave them there, mon cœur. They don't deserve the space in your head." Talia turned in her arms, her hands grasping the lapels of Marguerite's silk robe. She dropped to her knees. Marguerite. I spent my whole life thinking she was a mountain, and she was just sand. Marguerite pulled her closer, the intimacy immediate and grounding. She began to undo the buttons of Talia's ivory blazer, her movements slow and deliberate. Mountains don't love you. Sand doesn't hold you. Forget the mountain. She leaned in, her lips grazing Talia's jawline before finding the sensitive hollow of her throat. Talia let out a jagged breath, her eyes fluttering shut. This was the only place she didn't have to be a CEO or a survivor. Here, she was just Talia. Marguerite's hands traveled lower, tracing the curve of Talia's waist with a proprietary touch, pulling her flush against her. Look at me, she commanded softly. Talia opened her eyes. Marguerite's blue gaze was fierce, bright with a mixture of desire and a terrifyingly deep loyalty. I didn't marry a Cohen, Marguerite said, her thumb tracing Talia's lower lip. I married the woman who bled through her shoes in Lyon and still had the audacity to tell me I was wrong about my own wine. I married the woman who made me feel like the world was wide again. She kissed Talia then, not a tentative kiss, but one that tasted of red wine and absolute possession. It was playful and hungry all at once. Talia responded, her fingers tangling in Marguerite's hair, pulling her deeper into the moment. They moved together toward the oversized velvet sofa, a tangle of limbs and soft laughter. Marguerite pushed Talia back against the cushions, hovering over her, her eyes dancing with a rare, mischievous spark. You know, Marguerite whispered, nipping playfully at Talia's earlobe, I think I prefer the boss version of you. She's very demanding. Oh, is she? Talia laughed, her hands sliding down Marguerite's back, pulling her down until there was no space left between them. And what does the boss want right now? She wants to forget there is a world outside this room, Marguerite murmured against her lips. In the hours that followed, there was no talk of debt, or queens, or the ghosts of Connecticut. There was only the heat of skin, the soft rustle of silk, and the quiet, rhythmic language of two people who had built a world out of nothing but each other. Talia realized, as Marguerite's head rested on her chest and their fingers remained entwined, that this was her true vengeance. Not the money, not the club, but the fact that she was capable of being held, and Marguerite was capable of holding her. The Cohens had the silver. Talia had the soul. Chapter 12. The Quiet After the Storm. The next morning, the silence in Talia's penthouse office was broken by the frantic blinking of the intercom. Madame Cohen-Deschaze, her assistant's voice crackled, sounding uncharacteristically hesitant. Your mother is on line 1. Again. She's claiming there has been a terrible misunderstanding with the movers at the estate. And your sister, Bianca, she's been sitting in the lobby for 2 hours. She's brought a gift for Matteo. A Steve bear, she says. Talia didn't look up from the tablet where she was reviewing the morning's revenue for the Gilded Lily. She was dressed in a soft, charcoal cashmere sweater, her feet tucked under her on the velvet sofa. The sharp edges of the woman in the Louboutins had softened, but the steel remained. Tell the front desk to donate the bear to the children's hospital, Talia said calmly. And tell my mother that the misunderstanding is hers alone. The lease for the Queen's apartment is in her name now. My involvement in her housing ended at midnight. She's crying, Talia, the assistant whispered. She says she wants to be a grandmother. She says she realizes now that she was too hard on you because she wanted you to be strong. Talia finally looked up, a small, sad smile touching her lips. She didn't want me to be strong. She wanted me to be silent. The only reason she wants to be a grandmother now is because Matteo is a Deschaze. If he were the son of a dishwasher, she wouldn't even know his name. She pressed the disconnect button. The silence that followed was absolute and beautiful. Was that them again? Marguerite asked, walking in with 2 cups of café au lait. She set one down in front of Talia and sat on the arm of the sofa. The apologies have started, Talia said, taking a sip of the coffee. They're surprisingly uncreative. It's all family is everything, and we miss you. Not a single word about the 15 years of silence. Because they are mourning their lifestyle, not their daughter, Marguerite said, leaning down to kiss Talia's temple. Do not let their noise into this house, mon amour. We have a much more important appointment. As if on cue, Matthew burst into the room, his little feet pattering against the hardwood. He was wearing his favorite pajamas covered in small French fleur-de-lis and carrying a picture he had colored in the kitchen with Chef Gaspard, who had stopped by to drop off fresh croissants. Man, look, I drew the restaurant. Talia took the drawing. It was a chaotic, colorful mess of yellow and blue. In the center were 3 stick figures, one tall with blonde hair, one tall with dark hair, and a small one in the middle holding a very large chocolate tart. There were no other figures in the drawing. No grandmothers. No aunts. Just the 3 of them. It's perfect, Matthew, Talia said, her voice thick with a genuine emotion she never showed the world. She pulled him into her lap, the scent of baby shampoo and cocoa replacing the lingering chill of the night before. An hour later, they were back at the Gilded Lily for a private family brunch before the club opened to the public. Table 7 had been scrubbed clean. The sun streamed through the high windows, dancing off the crystal and making the marble glow. Jean-Pierre approached, carrying a small silver tray with a single, exquisite chocolate soufflé. For the young master, Jean-Pierre said with a wink. Chef Gaspard says that since he was so brave during the inspection last night, he deserves dessert before his omelette just this once. Talia looked at Marguerite, who shrugged with a playful smile. Just this once, Talia agreed. As Matthew dove into the chocolate with pure, unadulterated joy, Talia looked out at her empire. She thought of the woman crying in the lobby and the woman panicking in a half-packed mansion. She felt no spite, no burning need for more revenge. The greatest punishment she could give them wasn't the poverty or the loss of status. It was the fact that she was happy without them. She had taken the failed product and turned it into a masterpiece, and they would never, ever be invited to see the final gallery. Talia picked up her glass of fresh orange juice and tapped it gently against Marguerite's. To the family we chose, Talia whispered. To the family that stayed, Marguerite replied. Outside, the city of New York hummed with a million stories, but inside the golden walls of the Lily, there was only peace. The cycle of entitlement was broken. The legacy was safe. And for the first time in 15 years, Talia Cohen was finally home. Chapter 13. The Sweetness of the Afterthought. The mid-morning sun draped across the primary suite of the Cohen-Duchesne's penthouse like a warm silk sheet. It was a rare, quiet Tuesday. Matthew had been dropped off at his French immersion preschool, protesting only slightly because he wanted to stay and help the gardener plant the spring tulips, leaving the house bathed in a silence that felt like a luxury in itself. Talia leaned back against the headboard, a book forgotten in her lap. Marguerite was beside her, the usual sharp tailoring of her business suits replaced by a soft linen robe. She was tracing the line of Talia's jaw with a feather-light touch. "You are thinking again," Marguerite whispered, her voice low and intimate. "I can see the gears turning. Are we buying another hotel, or are you just wondering if Matthew remembered his lunchbox?" Talia laughed, a soft, private sound that she saved only for this room. She set the book aside and turned into her wife's embrace. "Neither. I was just thinking about how quiet it is, and how, for a long time, I thought silence was a lonely thing. Now I realize it's just peace." Marguerite pulled her closer, her scent of expensive soap and lavender grounding Talia. "You earned this peace, Talia. You built it with your own 2 hands." They stayed like that for a long moment, the intimacy not just physical, but a deep, shared understanding of the life they had forged. Their empire was growing, new acquisitions in Tokyo and a boutique vineyard in Tuscany, but the real growth was here, in the quiet mornings where they didn't have to prove anything to anyone. I saw a report from the property manager this morning, Marguerite mentioned casually, playing with a stray lock of Talia's hair. The apartment in Queens. Talia pulled back slightly, one eyebrow arched. And? Your sister has taken a job at a high-end department store. Behind the jewelry counter. The irony was not lost on the manager who hired her. He said she's quite good at selling the things she can no longer afford. Talia felt a brief flicker of something, not pity, but a clinical sort of observation. And my mother? She's consulting for a vintage resale shop, Marguerite said with a small, elegant shrug. Apparently, her only remaining skill is identifying authentic Hermès scarves. She has to take the subway to get there. The manager says she complains about the noise, but she hasn't missed a shift. She needs the commission to keep the lights on. Talia nodded slowly. The image of Eleanor Cohen, the woman who once looked down on the world from a Connecticut mansion, now haggling over the price of a pre-owned handbag in a crowded shop, should have felt like a massive victory. Instead, it felt like an afterthought. A footnote in a much better book. They're living the life I started with, Talia said softly. But without the youth or the drive to change it. They're just existing. Forget them, Marguerite whispered, leaning in to press a lingering kiss to Talia's lips. The kiss tasted of coffee and the future. They're a ghost story we don't tell anymore. We have a flight to Milan this evening, a son who wants to be an astronaut chef, and a bed that we don't have to leave for at least another hour. Talia smiled, pulling the duvet up and shutting out the rest of the world. The clicking of the Louboutins had long since stopped, replaced by the steady, rhythmic heartbeat of a woman who was no longer running. She had survived the rain. She had conquered the cold. And now, in the arms of the woman she loved, Talia Cohen-Deshays finally let herself be warm. Epilogue: The weight of the keys. 6 months later, the morning air in Connecticut was crisp, carrying the scent of turning leaves and damp earth. Talia sat in the back of a black car, idling at the end of the long, winding driveway she had once walked down in the rain. The iron gates of the Cohen estate stood open. They looked rusted, the C monogram at the center peeling and pathetic. Beside her, Marguerite was a warm, constant presence. She wasn't looking at the house, she was looking at Talia, her hand resting firmly on Talia's thigh, her thumb tracing small, soothing circles through the fabric of her slacks. You don't have to go in, Marguerite whispered. We own the deed. We don't have to inhabit the memory. Talia looked at the front door, the door where she had once been told she was a failed product. She felt the phantom ache in her feet, a ghost of the blisters from Lion. I need to know, Talia said. I need to see if the monster is still there. They stepped out of the car together. The silence of the estate was heavy. Inside, the grand foyer was stripped of its life. Without Eleanor's frantic, performative energy, the house felt like a hollowed-out skull. There were rectangular shadows on the wallpaper where portraits used to hang. Talia walked to the center of the room. She waited for the rage to hit her. She waited for the tears. But all she felt was dusty. Man, look. A hidey hole. Matthew's voice echoed through the empty hall as he discovered the small space under the grand staircase. He began to crawl inside, his laughter bright and irreverent, shattering the funereal gloom of the house. Talia watched him. He had no idea this was the place where she was taught to be small. To him, it was just a playground. Talia. Marguerite was standing by the window, holding a small, silver-framed photograph that had been left behind on a mantel. She handed it over. It was a photo of Talia at 10 years old, sitting at a piano. Her back was too straight, her face a mask of miserable concentration. It wasn't a child, it was a project. Talia looked at the photo, then at Matthew, who was now trying to slide down the banister while Jean-Pierre, who had driven with them, pretended to be a stern guard. "She's still writing to me," Talia said softly, setting the photo face down. "The letters from Queens. They're full of advice on how I should run the conglomerate, how I should dress. She thinks because I won her game, I'm finally her daughter." Marguerite stepped behind her, wrapping her arms around Talia's waist, pulling her back into the heat of her body. She pressed a lingering, playful kiss to the nape of Talia's neck. "And what are you going to do with the advice of a woman who has to take the bus to work?" Talia leaned her head back against Marguerite's shoulder, closing her eyes. The touch was so familiar, so grounding, that the house around them seemed to vanish. "I'm going to do what I should have done 15 years ago." Talia pulled a heavy brass key from her pocket. The key to the front door. She looked at it for a moment, then walked to the open front door and tossed it into the tall, unkempt grass of the lawn. "We're selling it," Talia said. "Every brick, every memory. We'll turn it into a community center or a park. Something that breathes." "And the letters?" Marguerite asked, her hands sliding down to find Talia's, intertwining their fingers. "I'm going to stop reading them. She can have the last word, Marguerite. I have the last life." Talia turned in her wife's arms. The intimacy between them was a tangible shield, a golden light in a gray room. She reached up, cupping Marguerite's face, her thumb brushing over the elegant line of her cheekbone. "Thank you," Talia whispered, "for showing me that gold isn't a standard. It's just a color." Marguerite smiled, that private, mischievous tilt of her lips. "I told you, mon cœur. You were always the masterpiece. They were just too poor to afford you." They shared a kiss that tasted of the future, bright, clean, and entirely their own. Outside, the driver started the engine. As they walked down the steps for the final time, Talia didn't look back. She didn't need to see the house disappear in the rearview mirror to know she was finally, absolutely free. The failed product was gone. Talia Cohen-Deshays, new owner of the Gilded Lily, had taken her son and her wife home. Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe and like this video and follow me for more stories. You are always welcome here, and leave me a comment or a thumbs up, just letting me know if you like the story and would like more, or is there perhaps an idea that you would like to share or let me write for you.